When Volkswagen launched the ID.3 in 2019, it made a lot of noise about how it had built a Golf-sized car with the interior space of a Passat. And how nice was that to use electric car technology to rethink how a car was packaged. When everyone else was building big and heavy SUVs, there was VW building something smaller and more intelligent. And then it followed the ID.3 with a load of big and heavy electric SUVs, and now this, the enormous ID.7. So if the ID.3 is a Golf-sized car with the interior space of a Passat, then what does that make the ID.7? A Passat-sized car with the interior space of, what, a semi-detached house?
In this CarGurus UK review, we'll find out the answer to this and many other important questions, including: has VW fixed the ID's infotainment? What does a tap-tap massage feel like? And does a car roof get any cooler than the ID.7? So stick around, and remember that when it comes to finding your next car, you can find loads of great deals from top-rated dealers at cargurus.co.uk.
That Passat reference I made earlier actually isn't quite right, because in fact the ID.7 is longer than a Passat by about 10 centimetres. Actually, in terms of length, it sort of sits between a Passat and VW's old luxury saloon, the Phaeton. And amazingly, the wheelbase is actually longer than a Phaeton's. It's 3 metres long, the wheelbase, which bodes well for interior space. We'll look at that in a minute. In terms of the exterior, I'm not going to go on about it loads because you can make your own mind up, but it's a very clean design. I'm not sure white does it any favours, and it makes it very difficult to clean at this time of year, but it's a very clean design, very low, very aerodynamic. This is actually lower than an ID.3 in terms of the roof height, and being very aerodynamic, of course, bodes well for the range.
To that end, the ID.7 is said to be able to extract more than 380 miles from a full charge of its 77 kilowatt-hour battery, and if that's still not enough, an 86 kilowatt-hour battery is coming that will boost the range to over 430 miles.
Now, big batteries, of course, require a lot of electrons, and to that end, the ID.7 can charge at up to 175 kilowatts on a suitable rapid charger, and VW says that is enough with a 10-minute charge to get you another 126 miles of range. Now, admittedly, that's not as quick as you could add range to a Mark I Golf from the 1970s, but it's still pretty good by electric car standards, as is the boot. So this is 532 litres. The design here actually reminds me a bit like a Skoda Superb, it's this fastback design. Enormous boot, really practical. You can adjust the height of the boot floor as well, like this. That means you can have somewhere to tuck away your charging cables, and you can drop the rear seat backs, and with this in its higher position you get a flat through load bay. So, as noted earlier, the ID.7 has a particularly long wheelbase. It's about the same, in fact, as a Tesla Model S's, funnily enough. But even knowing that does not prepare you for the amount of space that you have back here. It's enormous, and it's not just that you have loads of legroom, it's also wide, so you can fit 3 adults across really easily. And even better, there's enough footroom here. I have size 10 feet. It's very rare to be able to put my feet in the middle seat of a car and not be cramped. But I can in this, so unless you're carrying someone like Shaquille O'Neal, I think you're going to have loads of room for people back here. The only side note is headroom. So I'm 5'11", this is fine for me, but again, well, if you're Shaq, you're probably going to be a bit squashed. Arguably the best thing about being in the front of the ID.7 is actually not this enormous 15-inch screen, which we'll come to in a minute, and it's not even these seats, which are incredibly comfortable. No, for me, the best thing is this new digital readout for the Speedo, which is a very slim design, very simple. It's like everyone else is going bigger and more complicated with their digital dials, and Volkswagen's gone, no, just give people the information they need, the speed and the range. It's brilliant, I love it, and it's supplemented by a head-up display, which does have a lot more information on, including augmented reality. So, for example, it will show you what lane to be in for your next sat-nav instruction. Combined, these just work brilliantly. I think it's a really elegant solution.
There's also a good amount of interior storage in the door bins and centre console, although it's a shame that half of the glove box has been given over to house the fuses.
As for the rest of the ID.7's interior, well, it's actually really good. This is something I was going to point out as well. The voice assistant, IDA, I'm not quite sure how you're supposed to say it, but it comes on all the time. Now, admittedly, you can have...
Oh, that's something...
Stop.
Oh,
Stop
that's
it.
Got it.
It's very annoying. You can change the prompt, so you could say something that you were much less likely to say than IDA or IDA, but it's very annoying. Elsewhere, interior quality, a really big step up from cars like the ID.3. You'd expect it to be. This is more expensive, but it is notable how much nicer inside this is. As it should be. This really feels like Volkswagen back on form in terms of interior quality. And there are some nice gadgets in here as well. So, massage seats, I mentioned earlier, they are part of an upgrade package, but they have so many different programs. I quite like the tapping one personally. It's quite relaxing. Oh yeah. And then this roof as well, again, optional upgrade, but it's a glass roof that you can make go opaque. Neat. As for this screen, so as mentioned, this is 15 inches, so it's a big screen, there's no getting around that. These controls here are now backlit, so you can see them at night, thank goodness. It also has new software on it, it's really quick to respond, and all these shortcuts across the top are actually great. So you can access your drive modes, your assist functions, you can do various things with charging here, you can get Apple CarPlay up there, so that's all great. It is still, in places, a bit overly complicated, this system. So for example, you're driving along the motorway, your passenger says, oh, I don't want the heating blowing on me. So you say, okay, well, I'll go into the heating menu. And this is what confronts you. I mean, I don't know about you, but I would much rather just have a little thing on the vent that you could turn and turn the vent off. But instead, you've got to faff around with all these directional air vents and stuff. It's just unnecessarily complicated, isn't it? The ID.7 is very much the luxury flagship of the Volkswagen range, and as such you'd expect it to be extremely comfortable, and in most ways it really is. You have, well, the luxury of space, we've already spoken about that, but you also have the luxury of peace and quiet. Well, depends who your passengers are, but as far as the car is concerned, you have the luxury of peace and quiet. So it has a new electric motor, and there is really zero whine from this motor. It's extremely quiet, and because the car's shape is so slippery, there's really no wind noise on the motorway, and actually there's very little tyre roar either. This car is on optional 20-inch wheels, and it still has barely any tyre roar. It's just a very, very comfortable car in which to cover miles.
The new motor isn't only quiet, it's responsive too. With an output of 282 horsepower and around 400 pound-foot of torque, it'll shift the ID.7 from 0 to 62 miles per hour in 6.5 seconds and onto a top speed of 112 miles per hour.
Now clearly those acceleration figures are not going to worry any Tesla drivers, but they're not really meant to. That's not the point of this car. And actually 6.5 seconds to 62 miles an hour is still plenty quick enough, and the motor responds so quickly, it picks up speed really nicely. It's plenty quick enough for most people, probably a bit too quick for what a lot of people will need it for. So performance is not a concern. The other thing that I want to talk about when we're talking about performance is the range. So obviously if you limit the performance a bit, the idea is you have potential to get a bit more range. Now if you back out of the figures that Volkswagen quotes for this car in terms of the overall range and the battery size, you get to around 4.9 miles per kilowatt hour is what they're claiming. In reality, we haven't seen that. We've seen a best of 3.8 to 3.9 miles per kilowatt hour. And what that means is from 100% charge, we're seeing around 300 miles indicated, which is obviously a long way shy of the 380 claimed. I would say that a lot of our driving in this car has been on the motorway at 70 miles an hour, which is obviously not where EVs are at their most efficient. So I think if you throw in lots of 50-mile-an-hour roads with this and some bit more town driving, you will see both the efficiency and the range go up a bit, if probably not quite to that 380 miles that they claim.
You don't get loads of levels of brake regen to play with in the ID.7, it's just regular drive or brake modes which you choose via the drive selector. But the brake mode does offer a good level of regen, and there's a pleasing simplicity to its operation.
So let's talk ride and handling. The first thing to say is that this particular car, it's in Pro Match trim, but it does have the optional adaptive dampers on. And as is VW's way, you can select the drive modes, and the dampers are one of the things that change when you go to sport mode. They get firmer, comfort mode, they get softer, etc. And then there's an individual mode where you can scroll between one of about 15 different damper settings and hopefully you can find your right one before you go straight through a hedge because you're not looking at the road. But anyway, if you go into sport mode, the ID.7 is composed, it's very neutral handling, it's fine, it's not really sporty. Chances are you're going to spend most of your time in comfort mode, and it is a comfortable car. It doesn't have like an air suspension type level of comfort to it, and it is a little bit wallowy over long bumps in the road, and you do still feel sharper bumps still transmit through the car, but generally speaking it is a very, very comfortable car.
And the price for all this luxury? Well, it might be a bit less than you're anticipating.
There are elements to the ID.7 pricing that do seem a bit cheeky. So we talked about the high price for having the pack with the dampers and the sunroof and a few other bits. It's also another £1,050 if you want a heat pump, for example. However, there are other parts of the ID.7's pricing that actually don't seem too bad at all. So for a car of this size and space and the range and the equipment that it has, a starting price of just under £52,000 doesn't sound too bad at all. Basically what you're doing is paying a similar price to a BMW i4 or a Tesla Model 3, but you're getting a car that's the size of a Tesla Model S or a Mercedes EQE. And on that note, if you're looking at an EQE, it's hard to think that you might not also consider an ID.7, given that the list price, it starts at around £16,000 less. So what to make of the Volkswagen ID.7? Well, it's a good car. In fact, in many ways, it's a very good car. And it's great to see that Volkswagen isn't just building more and more electric SUVs. However, when I think that this is Volkswagen's flagship luxury car, there is a part of me that wants to feel like driving it, I'm riding on a magic carpet. But in reality, it's more like riding on a regular carpet with some good underlay. And there's nothing wrong with that, it's still a nice sensation. But it's not magic. If you think about Volkswagen's last luxury car, the Phaeton, it was always a bit like you were driving a cut-price Audi A8, whereas with the ID.7 it's more like you're driving an electric Audi A6. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, of course, it's still a very nice car. But is it enough? Well, I guess time will tell.
Would you consider an ID.7 over electric offerings from BMW or Tesla? Let us know in the comments, and remember to head to cargurus.co.uk to find great deals on your next car, electric or otherwise.